Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to finally another episode of Tanks with CS. It's been a while, so I guess real life happens, but it's good to be back, and it's good to have you back. So today's video kind of serves to address two different topics, or perhaps it kind of has two different purposes. One is it kind of serves as a bit of a preview for the Object 277 Tier 10 Russian/Soviet heavy tank, which has been a grind target for myself for quite some time. I guess another purpose for today's video is essentially a bit of a look back into World Tanks for people who have not been playing the game much at all, or people who have given up on the game in the past year or two. Arguably I'm actually one of those people because obviously I got busy with other things in life, perhaps other video games, but also, in certain ways the games kind of started to frustrate me quite a bit. Balance is not quite there. Certain aspects and sectors of the community kind of became toxic. Certain game mechanics are, not really conducive to the health of the game's meta, if you will. Such as gold spam, pay to win, OP premium vehicles, and difficult people, of course. But anyway, I digress. So, what is the Object 277? What makes it special? What's the highlights of the tank? Well, I would say that, in history, as well as, in the game, the 277 essentially serves as a bit of upgrade to the T10 Tier 9 Soviet heavy tank. And in real life, it was actually a prototype, second generation endgame heavy tank from the late 50s and early 60s that the Soviet worked on, as perhaps a technological upgrade to the T10, which, in turn was a technological upgrade to tanks like the IS-3 or, the IS series, and if you go all the way back to the KV series. So with that said, if you know how, the fast and relatively compact Russian heavy tanks play, you should roughly know how this tank play. For example, it has relatively good mobility. For a heavy tank, of course, it's fast enough to roll with medium tanks in certain situations, but, not quite there. If you want to compare between this versus, some of the more speculative/fantasy fast vehicles you get in the game. Firepower, I would say, is conventionally good, but not fantastic or insane or game breaking. Like the pay to win premium HE shell you get on the Japanese Type 5, or some of the new autoloader tanks and so on and so forth. It's kind of like, in terms of firepower and mobility, this tank in a sense will be a dream if it had been released back in like 2014 or 2015. But ironically, due to the lack of balance and the power creep, this tank will only be considered to be competent in a relatively conventional and vanilla way. And the story kind of stays the same when it comes to the protection of the tank. It has fairly well sloped hull and a Soviet-style Subo turret. So essentially, the turret is mostly immune to any of the non-gold ammo you will run into at Tier 10, and somewhat resistant even against gold ammo, which is, what the Soviet turrets are famous for. The hull for the tank, once again, would have been great if it was released like about 4 years ago, if not 5 years ago. It's 140mm and fairly rounded and sloped. The shaping of the hull, in a sense, kind of resembles that of maybe the M48 or the E5. For that, it's not particularly angular, but kind of rounded. So, as a design scheme, this tank is, in that regard, not quite conventionally Soviet. But, once again, Soviet vehicles like this usually aren't particularly heavy or, particularly heavy-handed of a design. That, this is not really a 100-ton plus vehicle that's blocky and angular and, just simply have the raw thickness of armor to withstand pretty much anything you throw at it. That's not really this tank. If anything, the Type 5, or to a lesser extent, maybe the Maus, it's more like that. Soviet tanks like this in game, as well as to a lesser extent in real life, have long relied on the angles and the trolliness and the complexity of their armor configuration to survive. So it's not really because the thickness of your armor that enemy projectiles simply could not punch through, but much rather the fact that they might hit you at a funky angle and they just kind of glance off and bounce off. So, anyways, this very first game I played in this tank, ironically, ended up being quite a bit of a shocker. A shocker in regards to this tank, but also a shocker in regards to how the game has become at this point. Obviously, in the beginning, I decided to go to the middle of the map to spot a little bit, since even though I'm in a heavy tank, but I don't assume that people on my team will be doing that. So somebody doing it is better than nobody doing it. And then after doing a few spots and getting a few early shots in, I decided to flex to the east side of the map, simply because I noticed that the enemy have more of a medium and tank destroyer presence on the west side in the middle part of the map. So I know that chances are their heavies will show up to the east side with no support. And myself being top tier, even though my tank is not really invincible or perfect, I stand a relatively better chance at engaging enemies on favorable terms and coming out of it relatively good, so to speak. So overall, I like this tank. To me, it's almost second nature, because I'm somebody who has played a lot of heavies, especially fast heavies like the IS-3 or the T-10, or quite frankly the IS-7. So I know how to make the armor work. I know how to make the mobility work. The gun, once again, is not a railgun. It's not a laser, but I roughly know how to get the most out of it, give or take. After all, I'm not really new to the game anymore. 35k games plus under my belt. Even though given the circumstances, I have really slowed down quite a bit since about maybe a year or two ago, give or take. So at this point in the game, unfortunately, even though I have essentially dominated the flank of the map I put myself in charge of, and essentially annihilated every single enemy I ran into on the east side of the map with 4 kills and 6,000 damage, I have essentially noticed that pretty much the rest of my entire game, or should I say team, have fallen apart and melted, give or take. Sure, we have a few passive tank destroyers sitting in the back, but I don't put high hope in them surviving, give or take. So I know that the enemy have quite a few heavy units in the tank alley on the west side of the map, but I decided to not essentially relocate myself all the way there right away, simply because I know the enemies also have a presence in the middle of the map, and by driving all the way over there, I might take a few hits, I might get spotted. The enemies might know my intention, and ultimately I'm just one guy, and if they start paying attention to me, things could be a little problematic, if you will. So right now I'm essentially trying to multitask. I'm trying to spot enemies, and I'm also trying to engage enemies my allies have spotted. Obviously, in a sense, you want to prioritize enemies the allies have spotted, because you don't want your spotter to get spotted themselves. And also I know that because I'm top tier, there's a good chance my allies won't survive the enemies. And obviously enemy lights end up ramming me, but since my tank is a much heavier tank, he didn't survive the ram. And at this point you will see that, even though the alpha and DPM combo for this tank is decent, it's not really game breaking or particularly spectacular. For that, even though I managed to eliminate some of the tanks and the enemies have in the area, I couldn't get rid of all of them before they can go into cover. And unfortunately, I'm kind of forced to chase down the enemy tank destroyer, which is a Swedish tank, obviously from the Cold War. That's obviously quite a bit faster than my tank, has a really high penetrating gun, and it's also relatively stealthy, on top, of being mobile. So I try to chase the enemy down, but I quickly realize I have no chance. So even though my tank can do 50 kilometer an hour on good road, I mean the enemy tank is essentially an automobile, for the lack of a better word. So at this point I realize if I do not go back to my cap and try to deal with the enemy capper, this one's going to be a loss regardless. And myself not being that much of a scumbag, I hate to say, decided that it would be smart for me to try to go back and defend. At least try to give my team a chance to win, even though the chance is fairly slim at this point. Because if I don't go back and defend, they will cap out in the matter of about 20 seconds. But unfortunately, the enemy E-100 is on high health. He spotted me, he shot me, he bounced me. I also got shot by the enemy tank destroyers. Swedish tank ended up killing me. I ended up resetting our cap right before I died. But even though I did plenty, it wasn't enough. Welcome to Water Tanks 2019. What a shame. So, ironically, despite the circumstances, I aced the tank on my first try. Earned a few rewards: Top Gun, High Caliber, Defender, 6 kills. And obviously top, in terms of damage and also XP on my team. Unfortunately, looks like pretty much the entirety of my team, except for myself, hardly broke 2k, and most of them probably didn't even break 1k. So they were essentially just executed on the spot, even before they had a chance to do much. Or much rather, they were just ignorant or negligent or incompetent enough that they were essentially dead on arrival, for the lack of a better word. So I bounced 6k also, and spotted about 2k. Made about 55k of profit, without even a premium account. So I suppose, for a veteran tank player, I couldn't think of another thing that can, give you a better idea of what the hell's going on with the game at this point than this. Oh well.